Can you imagine a secret hidden in plain sight right under the noses of those in power? A truth so unsettling it could unravel the very fabric of reality as they knew it. It was August 14, 1944, 2:17 p.m. at the Papago Park prisoner of war camp in Arizona. The desert sun beat down relentlessly, baking the already parched earth to a crisp. The air shimmered with heat, making the distant mountains appear to dance like mirages. Inside the compound, the atmosphere was thick with a different kind of heat, the simmering tension between guards and prisoners. Sergeant Miller wiped the sweat from his brow, the gritty dust clinging to his skin. Another day, another rotation around the perimeter. The Japanese prisoners of war went about their routine, some tending to the meager garden, others repairing fences, their movements precise and economical. They spoke little, their faces inscrutable. Miller had seen a lot in his years with the army, but these men were different. They possessed a quiet intensity, a stoicism that bordered on unsettling. He couldn't quite put his finger on it, but there was something off. He passed the mess hall, the aroma of boiled vegetables and stale bread wafting through the air. Lunch, another culinary masterpiece courtesy of Uncle Sam, he grimaced. Even the guards dreaded mealtime. The prisoners, however, seemed indifferent, consuming the unappetizing fare with the same detached acceptance they applied to everything else. Suddenly, a commotion erupted near the back of the mess hall. Shouts in Japanese, harsh and guttural, filled the air. Miller quickened his pace, his hand instinctively reaching for his sidearm. What now? He arrived to find a group of prisoners gathered around one of the long tables. At the center stood a young man, no older than 20, clutching an empty Spam can. His face was pale, his eyes wide with a mixture of fear and disbelief. He was yelling, gesticulating wildly at the label on the can. "Nanny, Nanny," Miller heard a few words he recognized, mixed in with a torrent of Japanese. What was going on? Another prisoner, older and more composed, stepped forward. He spoke haltingly in broken English. He read the can, the words. Miller frowned. "What about the words? It's just the ingredients." "Pork, ham, salt, water." The older prisoner shook his head, his eyes filled with a deep unease. "No, not ingredients, the symbols, the meaning." Miller didn't understand. Symbols, meaning it was just a can of processed meat, but the younger prisoner's reaction was unsettling. He was now trembling violently, his face slick with sweat. Several other prisoners looked equally disturbed, their eyes darting nervously around the room. "What symbols, what meaning?" Miller demanded, his voice rising. The older prisoner hesitated, glancing at his comrades. He seemed afraid to speak. Finally, he leaned in close to Miller, his voice barely a whisper. He says it tells of a great deception, a hidden truth," Miller scoffed. "Hidden truth? It's a can of Spam. What kind of hidden truth could it possibly contain?" But the prisoner remained unmoved, his gaze unwavering. "The words, they are not what they seem. They are a code, a message." Miller dismissed the claim as ridiculous, the ramblings of a bored and homesick prisoner. But something about the intensity of the younger man's reaction, the palpable fear in the room, made him pause. What if there was something more to this than met the eye? He confiscated the can, ordering the prisoners back to their duties. As he walked away, he couldn't shake the feeling that he had just stumbled upon something significant, something strange. He decided he would show the can to Captain Davies, the camp's intelligence officer. Davies was a stickler for detail, and perhaps he could make sense of this bizarre incident. Later that evening, Miller found Davies in his office, poring over documents. He explained what had happened, showing him the Spam can. Davies listened intently, his expression unchanging. He took the can, examining it closely. "Interesting," he murmured, turning the can over and over in his hands. "I've heard stranger things. These Japanese are known for their eccentricities." He pulled out a magnifying glass, scrutinizing the label. "The ingredients are standard, nothing unusual here." Miller felt a surge of frustration. "But the prisoner, sir, he was genuinely terrified. He said it was a code, a message." Davies chuckled. "Sergeant, these men are our enemies. They will say anything to sow discord, to create confusion. Don't let your imagination run wild." He handed the can back to Miller. "Forget about it. It's just a can of Spam." But Miller couldn't forget about it. He returned to his barracks, the image of the young prisoner's terrified face burned into his mind. He tossed the can into a trash bin, but even then he couldn't shake the feeling that he was throwing away something important. That night, Miller found himself unable to sleep. He tossed and turned in his bunk, the incident replaying in his mind. He finally got up, unable to bear the restlessness any longer. He decided to take another walk around the perimeter. The camp was quiet, the only sounds the rustling of the wind and the distant howl of a coyote. The moon cast long, eerie shadows across the compound. As Miller walked, he noticed something unusual. A faint light flickered in one of the prisoner barracks. Curious, he approached the building, peering through a crack in the wall. He saw several prisoners huddled together, whispering intently. In the center of the group, the young man from the mess hall was speaking, his voice low and urgent. He was holding something in his hands. Miller strained to get a better look. It was another Spam can. Miller's heart pounded in his chest. What were they doing? Was Davies wrong? Was there something truly hidden in those seemingly innocuous labels? He watched for what seemed like an eternity, his mind racing. He couldn't understand the words they were saying, but the intensity of their conversation was unmistakable. They were planning something. Suddenly, the young prisoner looked up, his eyes meeting Miller's through the crack in the wall. He froze, his face paling. He quickly said something to the others, and they all fell silent. Miller knew he had been discovered. He burst through the door, his gun drawn. The prisoners scrambled back, their faces a mixture of fear and defiance. "What's going on here?" Miller demanded, his voice sharp. "What are you planning?" The prisoners remained silent, their eyes fixed on the floor. The young man still clutched the Spam can, his knuckles white. Miller stepped forward, grabbing the can from his hand. He examined it closely. It was identical to the one from the mess hall, but something was different. Scratched into the label, barely visible in the dim light, were a series of small symbols. He recognized them. They were Japanese characters, but not the standard ones. They were archaic, almost forgot. He had seen them once before in an old book about Japanese folklore. He remembered what the book had said about these symbols. They were used in ancient rituals, in ceremonies designed to communicate with spirits. A chill ran down his spine. What were these prisoners trying to do? Summon spirits? It seemed absurd, yet the evidence was right in front of him. The terrified reaction to the can, the secret meeting, the strange symbols, it all pointed to something far more sinister than a simple escape attempt. "Where did you get this can?" Miller asked, his voice trembling slightly. No one answered. "Tell me," he shouted, his patience wearing thin. Finally, the older prisoner from the mess hall stepped forward. "We found it," he said, his voice barely audible. "Hidden in the food shipment." "Hidden? Who hid it?" The prisoner hesitated. "We do not know, but we believe it is a message from our ancestors." Miller didn't believe him. This was no message from the ancestors. This was something else, something darker. He had to find out what these symbols meant, what these prisoners were planning. He ordered the prisoners to be confined to their bunks and confiscated the can. He returned to his barracks, his mind racing. He knew he couldn't dismiss this as the ramblings of crazy prisoners anymore. Something was definitely going on, and he was determined to uncover the truth. The next morning, Miller sought out Captain Davies again, determined to convince him that something was amiss. He showed him the can with the scratch symbols, explaining what he had seen the night before. Davies listened patiently, but his expression remained skeptical. "Sergeant, I appreciate your diligence, but I still think you're overreacting. These symbols are probably just some kind of code. They're probably planning an escape." "But sir, the symbols, they're not military code. They're ancient, religious even. I think they're planning something else, something bigger," Davies sighed. "Sergeant, we're at war. These men are our enemies. There's something bigger, is probably just to kill us all and go back home. Let's not get carried away with superstition." He paused, then added, "However, I will admit that it's unusual. Tell you what, I'll send the can to intelligence. They can analyze the symbols, see if they can make anything of it. In the meantime, I want you to keep a close watch on these prisoners. But try not to let it consume you, Miller. We have a war to fight." Miller nodded, feeling a mixture of relief and frustration. At least Davies was taking it somewhat seriously. But he knew that waiting for intelligence to analyze the symbols could take weeks, even months. He couldn't afford to wait that long. He had to find out what these prisoners were planning, and he had to do it now. He decided to take matters into his own hands. He spent the next few days observing the prisoners, studying their behavior, trying to decipher their movements. He noticed that they seemed to be communicating in subtle ways through glances, gestures, and barely audible whispers. They were more guarded than ever, their faces masks of inscrutability. He also noticed that they were paying particular attention to the camp's water supply. They would often linger near the well, watching the guards as they drew water. Sometimes they would even try to engage the guards in conversation, asking seemingly innocuous questions about the well's depth, its source, its history. Miller found their interest in the water supply odd. What were they planning to do? Poison the water? That seemed like a desperate move, one that would surely lead to their capture and execution. But then he remembered something he had read about Japanese warfare. They were known for their patience, their meticulous planning, their willingness to sacrifice everything for the greater good. Perhaps they weren't planning to poison the water. Perhaps they had something else in mind. One evening, as Miller was making his rounds, he noticed one of the prisoners slipping away from his barracks. He followed him, keeping a safe distance. The prisoner moved stealthily through the shadows, heading towards the edge of the camp. Miller watched as the prisoner approached the fence, carefully checking to make sure he wasn't being observed. He then reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, sharp object. A makeshift knife fashioned from a piece of metal. Miller tensed, ready to intervene. Was the prisoner planning to escape? But instead of trying to cut the fence, the prisoner began to dig at the ground beneath it. He worked quickly and efficiently, his movements precise and practiced. Miller realized what he was doing. He wasn't trying to escape. He was digging a tunnel. Miller waited until the prisoner had dug a sizable hole, then he stepped out of the shadows, his gun drawn. "Don't move," he commanded. The prisoner froze, his eyes wide with fear. He slowly raised his hands in the air. Miller approached the tunnel, peering into the darkness. It was narrow and shallow, barely big enough to crawl through, but it was definitely a tunnel. He pulled the prisoner away from the hole and searched him. He found nothing else of significance. "What is this?" Miller demanded, his voice hard. "Where does this tunnel lead?" The prisoner remained silent, his eyes fixed on the ground. "Answer me," Miller shouted, losing his patience. Finally, the prisoner spoke, his voice barely a whisper. "It leads to the water well." Miller's blood ran cold. The water well, that was it. They weren't planning to poison the water. They were planning to contaminate it, but with what? What could they possibly use to contaminate the water supply of an entire prisoner of war camp? He forced the prisoner to crawl through the tunnel, following close behind him. The tunnel was damp and claustrophobic, the air thick with the smell of dirt and decay. After what seemed like an eternity, they reached the end of the tunnel. It opened up directly beneath the water well. Miller crawled out of the tunnel, his heart pounding in his chest. He looked around, trying to make sense of what he was seeing. The area beneath the well was dark and damp. The only light came from a small opening in the ground above. He could hear the sound of water trickling nearby. Suddenly, he noticed something lying on the ground. A small wooden box. He picked it up, his hands trembling. It was intricately carved, decorated with the same archaic symbols he had seen on the spam can. He opened the box, his breath catching in his throat. Inside, nestled on a bed of silk, was a small, intricately carved doll. It was a ningyo, a traditional Japanese doll, but this was no ordinary doll. Its face was contorted in a grotesque expression of pain and suffering. Its eyes were wide and staring, filled with an unbearable sadness, and its mouth was open, revealing a row of sharp, needle-like teeth. Miller stared at the doll, his mind reeling. What was this thing? What was it doing here then? He remembered something else he had read about Japanese folklore. Ningyo dolls were sometimes used in dark rituals, in ceremonies designed to transfer curses. He looked back at the water well, a wave of nausea washing over him. They weren't planning to contaminate the water with poison. They were planning to contaminate it with a curse. But why? What could they possibly hope to achieve by cursing the water supply of a prisoner of war camp? He knew he had to stop them. He had to destroy the doll, break the curse before it was too late. He grabbed the doll, intending to smash it against the ground. But as he raised his arm, he noticed something else, a small piece of paper tucked beneath the doll's silk bedding. He carefully unfolded the paper, his hands shaking. It was a list of names. He recognized the first name on the list. It was his own. His blood ran cold. This wasn't just a curse on the water supply. This was a curse directed at him. But why? What had he done to deserve this? He scanned the rest of the list, his eyes widening in horror. He recognized many of the names. They were all high-ranking officers at the camp. Captain Davies, Colonel Johnson, General Patton, they were all targets, but targets for what? What was the ultimate goal? He looked back at the doll, its grotesque face mocking him. He knew he was running out of time. He had to figure out what was going on, and he had to do it fast. He turned to the prisoner who had led him to the tunnel, his eyes filled with a mixture of fear and anger. "Tell me," he demanded. "What does this mean? What are you planning to do?" The prisoner remained silent, his eyes fixed on the ground. Miller grabbed him by the collar, shaking him violently. "Tell me," he screamed. "Or I swear I'll kill you." The prisoner finally looked up, his face pale and drawn. "We are not planning anything," he whispered. "We are simply fulfilling our destiny." "Destiny? What destiny?" The prisoner hesitated, then spoke in a low, chilling voice. "The prophecy, it foretells the downfall of your empire. It says that the curse will spread, poisoning your land, destroying your people, and it all begins with the water." Miller stared at the prisoner, his mind reeling. A prophecy, a curse. It all seemed so absurd, so unbelievable. But then he looked back at the doll, at the list of names, at the dark tunnel leading to the poisoned water well. And he knew with a chilling certainty that it was all real. He had stumbled upon something far more sinister than he could have ever imagined. He had uncovered a plot that threatened not only the prisoner of war camp, but the entire United States of America, and he was running out of time to stop it. He had to act. Now. He turned to leave the tunnel, intending to alert the authorities, to warn them about the impending danger. But as he reached the entrance, he saw something that stopped him in his tracks. Standing at the mouth of the tunnel, silhouetted against the moonlight, was a figure, a woman. He recognized her instantly. It was Nurse Emily, one of the camp's medical staff. She smiled at him, a chilling, unsettling smile. "Hello, Sergeant Miller," she said, her voice soft and melodic. "I've been waiting for you." Miller stared at her, his mind racing. What was she doing here? How long had she been watching him? "Nurse Emily," he said, his voice trembling slightly. "What's going on? What are you doing here?" She stepped forward, her eyes glinting in the darkness. "I'm here to help," she said, "to help you understand." "Understand what?" "Understand the truth," she replied. "The truth about the prophecy, the truth about the curse." She paused, then added, "and the truth about who is really in control." Miller stared at her, his heart pounding in his chest. He didn't understand what she was saying, but he knew with a growing sense of dread that he was about to find out. Nurse Emily reached into her pocket and pulled out something small and metallic. It was a key. She held it up, letting the moonlight glint off its surface. "This key," she said, "opens a door to a place where all the answers can be found." "What door?" Miller asked, his voice barely a whisper. "What place?" She smiled again, that unsettling, chilling smile. "The door," she said, "to the general's quarters." Miller stared at her, his mind reeling. The general's quarters? What could possibly be in the general's quarters that could explain all of this? But why? He asked. "Why the general's quarters?" Nurse Emily simply smiled and held out the key. "Because," she said, "the general is not who you think he is." Miller reached out and took the key, his hand trembling. He knew he was making a dangerous decision. He was trusting a woman he barely knew, a woman who was clearly involved in something sinister, but he also knew that he had no other choice. He had to find out the truth, no matter the cost. He looked at Nurse Emily, his eyes filled with a mixture of fear and determination. "Let's go," he said. "Let's see what's in the general's quarters." Together, they crept through the darkness, heading towards the general's residence. The camp was quiet, the only sounds the rustling of the wind and the distant howl of a coyote. As they approached the general's quarters, Miller noticed something strange. The guards who were usually stationed outside the building were gone. He stopped, his hand instinctively reaching for his sidearm. "Something's not right," he whispered. "Where are the guards?" Nurse Emily simply smiled. "They won't be a problem," she said. "They've been taken care of." Miller stared at her, his blood running cold. What did she mean, taken care of? Had she killed them? He didn't have time to dwell on it. They had reached the door to the general's quarters. Nurse Emily handed him the key. He took a deep breath and inserted it into the lock. The door clicked open. He hesitated for a moment, then pushed the door open and stepped inside. The room was dark, the only light coming from a small lamp on the general's desk. Miller scanned the room, his eyes darting from object to object. Everything seemed normal. General's desk was cluttered with papers and maps. His uniform hung neatly in the closet. His bed was neatly made, but then he noticed something odd, a small wooden box sitting on the general's desk. He recognized it instantly. It was the same type of box he had found in the tunnel, the one that contained the Ningyo doll. He approached the desk, his heart pounding in his chest. He reached out and opened the box. Inside, nestled on a bed of silk, was another doll, but this doll was different. This doll was dressed in a miniature version of the general's uniform, and its face was a perfect likeness of the general himself. Miller stared at the doll, his mind reeling. What did this mean? Was the general involved in the curse? Was he one of the prisoner's targets, or was he something else entirely? Suddenly, he heard a sound behind him. He whirled around, his gun drawn. Standing in the doorway was the general himself. He was smiling, a chilling, unsettling smile. "Hello, Sergeant Miller," he said, his voice soft and melodic. "I see you found my little secret." Miller stared at the general, his mind racing. He didn't understand what was happening, but he knew with a chilling certainty that he was in grave danger. "General," he said, his voice trembling slightly. "What's going on? What is this?" The general simply smiled and stepped into the room. "All in good time, Sergeant," he said. "All in good time." He reached into his pocket and pulled out something small and metallic. It was a lighter. He flicked it on, the flame illuminating his face. His eyes were glinting in the darkness, filled with an unholy light. "But first," he said, "let me show you something." He walked over to the desk and picked up the doll that resembled him. He held it up, letting the flame dance across its face. "This," he said, "is the key." He held the doll over the flame, his eyes fixed on Miller's face. "The key," he said, "to unlocking the true power." And then he dropped the doll into the flame. As the doll burst into flames, Miller felt a searing pain in his chest. He gasped for air, his body convulsing uncontrollably. He looked down at his chest and saw a strange symbol glowing on his skin. It was the same symbol he had seen on the spam can, the same symbol he had seen on the wooden box, the curse. It was working. He looked back at the general, his eyes filled with terror. The general was still smiling, his eyes glowing with an unholy light. "Welcome, Sergeant Miller," he said. "Welcome to the New World Order." And then everything went black. The next thing Miller knew, he was lying on the floor, his body aching. He looked around the room, his mind still reeling from what had just happened. The doll was gone, reduced to ashes. The general was gone, vanished without a trace. Nurse Emily was gone as well. He was alone. He struggled to his feet, his body weak and trembling. He had to get out of here. He had to warn someone about what was happening. He stumbled towards the door, his hand reaching for the knob. But as he reached the door, he saw something that stopped him in his tracks. Lying on the floor just outside the door was a small piece of paper. He picked it up, his hands shaking. It was a note written in a familiar hand. He recognized the handwriting instantly. It was Nurse Emily's. He unfolded the note and read the words, his blood running cold. "He's not the general," the note read. "He's something much, much worse." Miller stared at the note, his mind reeling. If the general wasn't the general, then who was he? What was he? And then he remembered something the prisoner had said in the tunnel. The prophecy, it foretells the downfall of your empire. It says that the curse will spread, poisoning your land, destroying your people, and it all begins with the water. The water, that was it. The curse wasn't just about killing a few high-ranking officers. It was about something much bigger. It was about poisoning the entire country. But how? How could they possibly poison the entire country with a single curse? Then he remembered something else Nurse Emily had said. "The door," she had said, "to the general's quarters. The door under the general's quarters." He finally understood where the tunnel led. It wasn't out of the camp, it was under the general's quarters. Did you like it? Leave your comment and tell us if you've ever heard any interesting stories about World War II. Miller scrambled back to his feet, the general's words echoing in his ears. "Welcome to the New World Order." He couldn't shake the searing pain in his chest, a constant reminder of the curse that now coursed through his veins. The general's quarters, now a scene of chaotic disarray, felt like a tomb. He had to warn anyone, before it was too late. He lunged for the door, his hand instinctively reaching for the knob, but the note on the floor stopped him cold. Nurse Emily's warning, "He's not the general, he's something much, much worse," resonated with terrifying clarity. If this man, this imposter, wasn't who he claimed to be, then who or what was he? And what was the true nature of this new world order he spoke of? The prisoner's chilling words from the tunnel flooded his mind. The prophecy, it foretells the downfall of your empire. It says that the curse will spread, poisoning your land, destroying your people, and it all begins with the water. The water, the poisoned well, the curse. It wasn't about a localized attack, a mere disruption within the prisoner of war camp. It was a calculated assault on the entire nation, a deliberate attempt to cripple America from within. But how could a handful of prisoners, armed with a cursed doll and a warped prophecy, possibly achieve such a devastating goal? The answer, Miller realized with growing horror, lay beneath his feet. Nurse Emily's cryptic clue, the door to the general's quarters, and the unnerving absence of guards led Miller to understand where the hidden tunnel beneath the general's quarters truly led. He turned on his heel and walked back to the opening the general created when the doll burned. He pushed himself back into the cramped, earthen passage, the metallic tang of blood filling his nostrils. He crawled blindly, the fear of the unknown driving him forward, the small note clutched tightly in his hand. The air grew heavy, thick with the scent of damp earth and something else, something acrid and unnatural. The tunnel sloped downward, becoming increasingly narrow, forcing him to inch forward on his stomach. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, the tunnel opened into a larger chamber. He cautiously raised his head, his eyes struggling to adjust to the dim light. He found himself in a vast underground cavern, its walls glistening with moisture. A subterranean stream trickled through the center of the chamber, disappearing into the darkness. But it wasn't the size of the cavern or the underground stream that made Miller's breath catch in his throat. It was what filled the space. Row upon row of wooden crates, stacked high against the walls, stretched as far as the eye could see. And emblazoned on each crate in bold black letters was a single chilling word. Spam. Miller pushed himself up, his legs trembling beneath him. He stumbled forward, his mind struggling to comprehend the sheer scale of what he was witnessing. Crates upon crates of spam filling an entire underground cavern. What could it possibly mean? Was this some kind of elaborate storage facility, a secret supply depot, or was it something far more sinister? He reached out and touched one of the crates, his fingers tracing the familiar outline of the spam logo. It felt cold, unnatural. He pried open one of the crates, his hands shaking with anticipation. Inside, nestled among layers of packing straw, were dozens of spam cans, their labels gleaming in the dim light. He picked one up, his eyes scanning the familiar list of ingredients: pork, ham, salt, water. The same ingredients he had seen on the can that had triggered the young prisoner's violent reaction. He turned the can over in his hand, searching for any sign of tampering, any clue as to what made these cans so different. And then he saw it. Etched into the bottom of the can, so small he almost missed it, was a tiny symbol. It was the same archaic Japanese character he had seen scratched into the label of the spam can in the barracks, the character that the older prisoner had said was used in ancient rituals to communicate with spirits. Miller's blood ran cold. He dropped the can as if it were a burning ember. This wasn't just a storage facility. It was a repository of cursed objects, each one capable of unleashing untold suffering upon the unsuspecting populace. But how could so many cans of spam, distributed across the country, possibly spread the curse on such a large scale? He picked up the can again, his fingers tracing the tiny symbol. It was more than just a symbol, it was a key. A key to unlocking something far more sinister than he could have ever imagined. He looked around the cavern, his eyes scanning the endless rows of crates. They weren't just storing spam cans, they were distributing something far more dangerous, a weapon of mass destruction disguised as a harmless food product. But why spam? Why this particular brand of processed meat? And how did these prisoners trapped in a remote prisoner of war camp in Arizona manage to coordinate such an elaborate and far-reaching scheme? The questions swirled in his mind, each one more perplexing than the last. He had to find out more. He had to understand the true nature of this curse, and he had to stop it before it was too late. Miller ventured deeper into the cavern, his senses on high alert. The air grew colder, the silence more oppressive. He passed row after row of spam crates, each one a silent testament to the prisoner's twisted ingenuity. As he moved further into the cavern, the crates began to change. Some were larger, made of a darker wood. Others were adorned with strange symbols, unlike anything he had ever seen before. He approached one of the larger crates, his heart pounding in his chest. He pried it open, his hands trembling with anticipation. Inside, nestled among layers of protective padding, was a complex piece of machinery. It was a pump intricately crafted from brass and steel. Tubes and wires snaked out from the pump, connecting to a series of smaller containers filled with a dark, viscous liquid. Miller didn't know what the liquid was, but he knew it couldn't be good. He examined the pump more closely, his eyes searching for any clue as to its purpose, and then he saw it. Scratched into the side of the pump, so small he almost missed it, was another symbol. It was the same archaic Japanese character he had seen on the spam cans, the character that the older prisoner had said was used in ancient rituals to communicate with spirits. But this time, the character was different. It was inverted, twisted into a grotesque and unnatural form. Miller's blood ran cold. This wasn't just a pump. It was a device designed to amplify the curse, to spread it far and wide. But how did it work, and what was the dark, viscous liquid that filled the containers? As if in answer to his question, he heard a faint gurgling sound coming from the center of the cavern. He turned towards the sound, his eyes scanning the darkness. And then he saw it. The subterranean stream that trickled through the center of the cavern wasn't just a stream. It was a conduit, a pathway for the curse to spread. The dark, viscous liquid was being pumped into the stream, slowly but surely poisoning the water supply. And the water, Miller realized with growing horror, wasn't just being used for drinking. It was being used to irrigate crops, to wash clothes, to cleanse the body. It was being used for everything. The curse was spreading through the water, infecting everything it touched. Miller knew he had to stop it. He had to destroy the pump, shut off the flow of the dark, viscous liquid. But as he reached for the pump, he heard a voice behind him. "I wouldn't do that if I were you, Sergeant Miller." Miller whirled around, his gun drawn. Standing in the shadows was Nurse Emily, her face illuminated by the dim light, but she wasn't alone. Behind her stood a group of prisoners, their faces grim and determined. And in the center of the group stood the general, his eyes glowing with an unholy light. "You," Miller exclaimed, his voice filled with rage. "You're behind all of this," the general simply smiled. "Indeed, Sergeant Miller," he said, "I am the architect of this new world order." "But why?" Miller demanded. "Why are you doing this?" the general chuckled. "Because, Sergeant Miller, your world is built on lies and deception. It is a world of greed and corruption, of war and destruction. It is a world that deserves to be destroyed. But innocent people will die," Miller protested. "They will suffer. Suffering is a necessary part of the process, Sergeant Miller," the general replied. "It is through suffering that humanity will be cleansed, that a new and better world will be born." Miller stared at the general, his mind reeling. He couldn't believe what he was hearing. This man was insane. He had to stop him, no matter the cost. He raised his gun, his finger tightening on the trigger. But before he could fire, Nurse Emily stepped forward, her hand outstretched. "Don't do it, Sergeant Miller," she said. "You don't understand what's really going on." "What are you talking about?" Miller demanded. "I understand perfectly well. This man is a madman. He's trying to poison the entire country." "No, Sergeant Miller," Nurse Emily replied. "He's trying to save it." Miller stared at her, his mind struggling to comprehend what she was saying. Save it? How could poisoning the entire country possibly save it? "You're crazy," he said. "You're all crazy." "We are not crazy, Sergeant Miller," Nurse Emily replied. "We are the only ones who see the truth." "The truth?" Miller scoffed. "What truth?" "The truth that you're all a bunch of delusional fanatics." "The truth," Nurse Emily replied, "is that this world is far more complex than you can possibly imagine. There are forces at work here that you cannot even begin to comprehend." She paused, then added, "The general is not just a man, Sergeant Miller. He is a vessel, a conduit for something far greater." "What do you mean?" Miller asked, his voice barely a whisper. Nurse Emily stepped closer, her eyes fixed on his face. "He is possessed, Sergeant Miller," she whispered. "Possessed by an ancient spirit, a spirit that has been waiting for centuries to be unleashed upon this world." Miller stared at her, his mind reeling. Possessed by an ancient spirit. All sounded so absurd, so unbelievable. But then he remembered the strange symbols, the cursed doll, the general's glowing eyes, and he knew with a chilling certainty that it was all real. He had stumbled upon something far more sinister than he could have ever imagined. He had uncovered a plot that threatened not only the prisoner of war camp but the entire world, and he was running out of time to stop it. He looked back at the general, his eyes filled with a mixture of fear and determination. "I don't care who you are," he said. "I'm not going to let you do this. I'm going to stop you no matter what it takes." The general simply smiled. "You cannot stop me, Sergeant Miller," he said. "My destiny is inevitable." He raised his hand and the prisoners stepped forward, their faces grim and determined. "Kill him," the general commanded. The prisoners lunged at Miller, their eyes filled with hatred. He raised his gun, ready to defend himself, but then he saw something that stopped him in his tracks. Nurse Emily stepped in front of him, her arms outstretched, shielding him from the attack. "Stop," she commanded. The prisoners hesitated, their eyes fixed on her face. "What are you doing, Emily?" the general asked, his voice filled with anger. "I'm doing what's right," she replied. "I can't let you do this, it's wrong." "Wrong?" the general scoffed. "You dare to question me? You who have been chosen to serve me." "I may have been chosen to serve you," Nurse Emily replied, "but I will not serve evil. I will not stand by and watch you destroy this world." She turned to Miller, her eyes filled with tears. "Run, Sergeant Miller," she said. "Get out of here, warn the others, tell them what's happening." Miller stared at her, his heart filled with gratitude and admiration. He knew he couldn't stay here. He had to escape, to warn the world about the impending danger. But he couldn't just leave Nurse Emily behind. "I'm not leaving you," he said. "We're in this together." "No, Sergeant Miller," she replied. "You have to go. I'll be fine. Just go, please." Miller hesitated for a moment, then nodded. He knew she was right. He had to go. He turned and ran, his heart pounding in his chest. He could hear the prisoners shouting behind him, their footsteps echoing through the cavern. He didn't dare look back. He just kept running, his mind focused on one thing: survival. He reached the entrance to the tunnel, squeezed through the narrow opening, and crawled as fast as he could towards the general's quarters. He had to get out of here to warn the world about the general's plan, but as he crawled through the tunnel, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched. He could feel eyes on him, cold and calculating. He quickened his pace, his heart pounding in his chest. He was almost there. Just a few more feet and he would be out of the tunnel. He reached the end of the tunnel, pushed himself up, and stumbled into the general's quarters. The room was empty. The general and Nurse Emily were gone. He didn't have time to worry about them. He had to get out of here to warn the others. He ran towards the door, his hand reaching for the knob, but as he reached the door, he saw something that made him freeze in his tracks. Lying on the floor just outside the door was a piece of paper. He picked it up, his hands shaking. It was a telegram. He recognized the sender immediately. It was from military intelligence. He unfolded the telegram and read the words, his blood running cold. "Sergeant Miller, report immediately to Phoenix headquarters. You are hereby relieved of duty. Urgent. Do not attempt to contact anyone at the camp. Repeat, do not attempt to contact anyone at the camp. Failure to comply will result in immediate arrest." Miller stared at the telegram, his mind reeling. He didn't understand what was happening. Why were they relieving him of duty? Why were they telling him not to contact anyone at the camp? What did they know and how did they know it? He looked around the room, his eyes searching for any clue, any explanation, but there was nothing. The room was empty, silent. He was alone. He had a terrible feeling he was walking into a trap. He crumpled the telegram in his fist. This couldn't be a coincidence. He knew too much. He was too close to the truth. Someone wanted him out of the way. But who and why? The only thing he knew for sure was that he couldn't trust anyone. He couldn't trust military intelligence. He couldn't trust anyone at the camp. He was on his own. He decided he would follow the orders, but not in the way they expected. He would go to Phoenix, but he would do his own investigation. He would find out who was behind this, and he would expose them no matter the cost. He turned and walked out of the general's quarters, his face grim and determined. He had a long and dangerous journey ahead of him, but he was ready. He had to be. The fate of the world depended on it. He began walking towards the main gate, but he veered off course and headed to the prison barracks. He needed to see something before he left. He needed to see if what he suspected was true. He quietly entered the barracks. The prisoners were all asleep in their beds, except for one. The young prisoner who had first reacted to the spam can. He was sitting up in his bed, staring blankly at the wall. Miller approached him cautiously. "Hey," Miller said softly. The young prisoner didn't respond. He just kept staring at the wall. Miller reached out and touched his shoulder. The young prisoner flinched, then turned to face him. His eyes were wide and vacant. "Are you okay?" Miller asked. The young prisoner didn't answer. He just kept staring at him, his eyes filled with a strange, unsettling light. Miller stared back, his heart pounding in his chest. Something was wrong, very wrong. He reached out and touched the young prisoner's forehead. It was burning hot. He quickly examined the other prisoners. The same vacant stare and burning hot. He understood. This wasn't about an escape attempt. This wasn't about cursing a few high-ranking officers. This was about something far more sinister. This was about infecting the entire prisoner population, turning them into vessels for the ancient spirit, creating an army of possessed soldiers ready to unleash chaos and destruction upon the world. Miller backed away from the young prisoner, his mind reeling. He had to get out of here. He had to warn someone about what was happening. He turned and ran out of the barracks, his heart pounding in his chest. He knew he was in grave danger. He knew he was being hunted, but he couldn't stop now. He had to keep going. He had to save the world. Miller slipped through the shadows, making his way towards the outer perimeter fence. He needed to get off the camp and fast, but as he neared the fence, he saw something that made him stop in his tracks. Standing just outside the fence, silhouetted against the moonlight, was a figure, a woman. He recognized her instantly. It was Nurse Emily, but she wasn't alone. Standing beside her was the general. And behind them stood a group of soldiers, their faces grim and determined. Miller stared at them, his mind reeling. He didn't understand what was happening. Why were they there? What did they want? The general stepped forward, his eyes glowing with an unholy light. "Hello, Sergeant Miller," he said, his voice soft and melodic. "We've been waiting for you." Miller stared at the general, his heart pounding in his chest. He knew he was trapped. He knew he was out of options, but he wasn't going to give up. He wasn't going to let them win. He reached for his gun, ready to fight to the death. But before he could draw his weapon, Nurse Emily stepped forward, her hand outstretched. "Don't do it, Sergeant Miller," she said. "It's over. There's nothing more you can do." Miller stared at her, his mind filled with confusion and despair. He didn't understand what she was saying. Why was she helping them? Had she been playing him all along? "Why, Emily?" he asked, his voice filled with pain. "Why are you doing this?" Nurse Emily looked at him, her eyes filled with tears. "I'm sorry, Sergeant Miller," she said, "but it's for the best. You wouldn't understand." "Understand what?" Miller demanded. "Understand that this world is doomed. Understand that the only way to save it is to destroy it." Miller stared at her, his mind reeling. He couldn't believe what he was hearing. This woman, this nurse, this supposed ally was a true believer, just like the general. She actually believed that destroying the world was the only way to save it. He realized that there was no reasoning with her. There was no hope. He had to escape, even if it meant leaving her behind. He made a sudden move, darting past Nurse Emily and heading towards the fence. The general barked an order and the soldiers opened fire. Bullets whizzed past Miller's head as he scrambled towards the fence. He reached the fence and began to climb, his hands tearing against the barbed wire. He could feel the bullets hitting the fence around him, ripping through the wood and metal. He finally reached the top of the fence and jumped down to the other side. He landed hard on the ground, his body aching from the fall. He scrambled to his feet and began to run, his heart pounding in his chest. He could hear the soldiers chasing after him, their footsteps echoing through the darkness. He knew he couldn't outrun them. He had to find a place to hide. He darted into the nearby woods, his eyes scanning the darkness for any sign of shelter. He finally found a small cave hidden behind a thicket of bushes. He crawled inside, his body trembling with exhaustion. He knew it was only a temporary refuge. They would find him eventually, but it was better than nothing. He closed his eyes and tried to catch his breath, his mind racing with thoughts of what he had seen, what he had learned. He had stumbled upon a conspiracy that threatened the very fabric of reality. He had uncovered a plot to poison the entire country, to unleash an ancient evil upon the world, and he was the only one who knew about it. He had to stop them, no matter what it took. He had to find a way to expose the general, to stop the curse from spreading. But how? He was just one man, armed with nothing but his wits and his courage. How could he possibly stand against such a powerful and sinister force? As he lay there in the darkness, his mind racing with thoughts of despair, he remembered something Nurse Emily had said. "The general is not just a man," she had said. "He is a vessel, a conduit for something far greater." What did she mean by that? What was the true nature of this ancient spirit that had possessed the general, and how could he possibly defeat it? As he pondered these questions, he heard a sound outside the cave, the sound of footsteps. They had found him. He closed his eyes, bracing himself for the inevitable. He knew it was the end. But then he heard something else, a voice, a familiar voice. "Sergeant Miller, are you in there?" Miller opened his eyes, his heart pounding in his chest. He recognized the voice. It was Captain Davies, the camp's intelligence officer. But what was he doing here? Had he come to arrest him, or had he finally realized the truth? Miller hesitated for a moment, then decided to take a chance. "Captain Davies," he called out. "Is that you?" "Yes, Sergeant Miller," Davies replied. "It's me. I need to talk to you." Miller crawled out of the cave, his hands raised in the air. He saw Davies standing there, his face grim and determined, but he wasn't alone. Standing beside him were several other soldiers, all armed and ready for action. Miller stared at them, his mind filled with confusion and hope. Had Davies finally come to his senses? Had he finally realized the truth about the general? "What's going on, Captain?" Miller asked. "Have you finally figured out what's happening here?" Davies nodded. "Yes, Sergeant Miller," he said. "I have, and I'm here to help you." Miller stared at Davies, his heart filled with relief. He wasn't alone anymore. He had backup. He had a chance. "What changed your mind?" Miller asked. Davies hesitated for a moment, then spoke in a low, grave voice. "I received a coded message," Davies explained. "It came from an unexpected source. The message contained information about the general, about his true identity, and about his plans. It was unbelievable." "Who sent the message?" Miller asked. Davies looked at Miller. "Nurse Emily," he responded. Miller stared at Davies, his mind racing. Nurse Emily? But how? Why? Had she been playing them all along? Was this some kind of elaborate trap? "I don't understand," Miller said. "I thought she was with the general. I thought she was helping him." Davies shook his head. "No, Sergeant Miller," he said. "She was working undercover. She was trying to stop him from the inside." Miller stared at Davies, his mind reeling. He couldn't believe what he was hearing. Nurse Emily, the woman he had trusted, the woman he had admired, was a double agent. She had been working against the general all along. But why hadn't she told him? Why had she let him believe that she was on the general's side? "Why didn't she tell me?" Miller asked. "Why did she let me think that she was helping him?" Davies sighed. "She couldn't trust you, Sergeant Miller," he said. "She didn't know who she could trust. She knew that the general had spies everywhere, that he could be listening at any moment. She couldn't risk revealing her true allegiance." Miller stared at Davies, his mind filled with a mixture of relief and anger. He was glad that Nurse Emily was on their side, but he was also furious that she had kept him in the dark. He had risked his life, he had almost died, all because she hadn't trusted him enough to tell him the truth. "Where is she now?" Miller asked. "Is she safe?" Davies shook his head. "I don't know," he said. "She sent the message and then disappeared. I haven't heard from her since." Miller stared at Davies, his heart sinking. He was worried about Nurse Emily. He knew that the general would be furious when he found out that she had betrayed him. He would stop at nothing to capture her, to punish her for her treachery. They had to find her before it was too late. "We have to find her," Miller said. "We have to save her." "I agree," Davies said. "But first we have to stop the general. We have to stop him from carrying out his plan." "What's the plan?" Miller asked. "What's he going to do?" Davies hesitated for a moment, then spoke in a low, grave voice. "He's going to unleash the curse," Davies explained. "He's going to poison the entire country." "I know," Miller said. "I saw the spam cans, I saw the underground cavern, I saw the pump." Davies nodded. "Then you understand the magnitude of the threat," he said. "We have to stop him before it's too late." "How?" Miller asked. "How are we going to stop him?" Davies looked at Miller, his eyes filled with determination. "We're going to follow him," he said. "We're going to track him down and stop him no matter what it takes." "But where is he?" Miller asked. "Where did he go?" Davies smiled. "I know where he went," he said. "Nurse Emily told me." "Where?" Miller asked, his voice filled with anticipation. Davies hesitated for a moment, then spoke in a low, chilling voice. "She said he was going to the water treatment plant, the main water treatment plant for the entire state." Miller stared at Davies, his blood running cold. The water treatment plant. If the general could poison the water supply at the water treatment plant, he could unleash the curse upon the entire state, and from there it could spread to the rest of the country. They had to stop him. They had to get to the water treatment plant before it was too late. "Let's go," Miller said, his voice filled with determination. "Let's stop him." Davies nodded, and the two men, along with the other soldiers, set off into the night, their hearts filled with a mixture of hope and dread. They knew they were facing a formidable enemy, a man possessed by an ancient evil, but they were determined to stop him, to save the world from his sinister plan. As they drove through the darkness, Miller couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. He could feel eyes on them, cold and calculating. He knew that the general had spies everywhere, that he could be listening at any moment. He had to be careful. He couldn't trust anyone. As they neared the water treatment plant, they saw something that made them stop in their tracks. Standing just outside the gate to the water treatment plant, silhouetted against the moonlight, was a figure. A figure dressed in a familiar uniform. A figure that Miller thought he would never see again. It was General Patton. Miller stared at the figure, his mind reeling. He didn't understand what was happening. What was General Patton doing there? Had he been involved in this conspiracy all along? Or was something else going on? Davies stopped the jeep and the soldiers jumped out, their guns raised and ready for action. They approached the figure cautiously, their eyes scanning the darkness for any sign of danger. As they got closer, Miller could see the figure more clearly. It was definitely General Patton, but something was wrong. His eyes were vacant, his expression blank. He was standing perfectly still like a statue. "General Patton," Davies called out. "Is that you?" The figure didn't respond. It just kept standing there, staring blankly ahead. Davies hesitated for a moment, then stepped forward, his hand outstretched. "General Patton," he said, "are you okay?" As Davies reached out to touch him, the figure suddenly moved. It turned towards Davies, its eyes snapping into focus. And then it spoke. But the voice that came out of its mouth wasn't the voice of General Patton. It was the voice of the general, the possessed imposter, the architect of the New World Order. "Hello, Captain Davies," the figure said, its voice soft and melodic. "I've been waiting for you." Miller stared at the figure, his blood running cold. He finally understood what was happening. The general hadn't just possessed the body of the imposter. He had possessed the body of General Patton himself. He had taken control of the highest-ranking officer in the entire region. And now he was in control of the water treatment plant. The curse was about to be unleashed. But just as Miller was about to act, General Patton grabbed Davies and threw him to the side. The soldiers began yelling, and before Miller could get a shot off, General Patton spoke a series of words. Miller grabbed at his head in pain. He saw many of the soldiers around him begin to convulse and grab at their heads in pain as well, but just as suddenly it stopped. Miller glanced around at the soldiers and Davies. All were unconscious. Except for one figure standing at the front of the water treatment plant gate. With an earth-shattering boom, the building behind General Patton burst into flames. The entire horizon began to glow a sickly green color, and the ground began to shake violently. At the head of the building, a large door began to crack open, revealing something massive was about to emerge. But what was it?